Pakistan is 81%. So why do we pay Pakistan to be our enemy? Why do we pay them to hate us? Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chairman, I submit they will do both of those things for free, and I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana?
Mr. Chairman, rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment and reclaim the time.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the recognition very much. The gentleman suggests that we need a new relationship with Pakistan. The gentleman claims, and I'm sorry that the easel just disappeared, but I believe it was about 64% of the Pakistan people consider us the enemy. I don't know the origin of that report, but I would take it at face value given the representation of my colleague. Colleague also suggests there's another poll, 81% of the U.S. people do not have a favorable opinion about Pakistan. And he did say that we need a new relationship, and I would agree with him. And I think relationships are built on communication and not polls. I think if we governed all of our actions in this Congress based on polls, we get nothing done. Sometimes we have to suck it up and do things that maybe at first are not politic to do. Sometimes people fight in their families, unfortunately, and hopefully they sit down and communicate and resolve their differences. Sometimes different groups of people have problems and maybe even don't like each other sometimes. But if they talk to each other and they get to know each other, maybe they can resolve their differences. The relationship with Pakistan, I would not deny, has been difficult, but maintaining that relationship is essential. This relationship has helped the U.S. make progress against terrorism, and Pakistan has allocated a significant part of their forces within their own borders to the counterterrorism mission. The world, I would remind my colleagues, is a very great place. In June of 2012, Pakistan demonstrated its commitment to a stable and secure Afghanistan by reopening the ground lines of communications. I regret with the gentleman that they were closed for a period of time. This has eased tensions with the U.S. and improved logistical support for our troops. Withdrawal of U.S. assistance would likely polarize Pakistan and exacerbate significant pro- and anti-American rifts within their military and their government generally. Rifts and difficulties we should be looking to heal, not exacerbate today. Aggravating this divide is very, very counterproductive to the objectives in this region, and I would add one further comment. In addition to counterterrorism activity, the fact is Pakistan's nuclear weapons capability provides ample reason for the U.S. to continue positive engagement, and I certainly would appreciate the yielding time to my colleague from New Jersey if he wishes it.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me associate myself with your remarks. Respectfully, we need to assure we have a relationship with the Pakistani government to make sure that their nuclear weapons capacity is well secured. And while polls may reflect, as the gentleman says, a very poor view of Americans of Pakistan, we need their support and cooperation, not only for the 68,000 troops we have there, but the international forces that are working with our troops to help the people of Afghanistan have a better life. So yes, there may be corruption, there may be ill will among the Pakistani people in our view of our involvement over there, but we need to, as we exit Pakistan, to make sure that we do it by get our forces out of there using the road network. Otherwise, we'll have to take a lot of our supplies and men by air, and that would be enormously expensive. So we need to keep our relationship a good relationship with the Pakistani government. I appreciate the gentleman's yielding to me.
Appreciate the gentleman's remark and would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas.
How much time do I have remaining?
1 minute remaining.
I thank the chairman. I appreciate the ranking member's comments regarding Pakistan. One thing, the bill cuts half of the funding to Pakistan. It does not cut the nuclear protection that the United States further emphasizes for Pakistan. So that is not cut in my amendment. The gentleman mentioned actions. I think Pakistan, the government of Pakistan over the last decade has shown that they cannot be trusted, that they use the money for improper purposes in Pakistan, and I am of the opinion that some of that money goes to hurt American troops that have been in the field for a good number of years. So I think that we should cut 50% of the money that we send Pakistan. It's in the best interest, in my opinion, of the United States. Their actions prove they cannot be trusted. I will yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields his time.
I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Texas.
Ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. It is now in order to consider the amendment number 26 printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the woman from Oregon seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 26, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Ms. Bonamici of Oregon.
Pursuant to the House Resolution 312, the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Chairman, the men and women of our National Guard serve their dual federal and state missions bravely. It is essential that we appropriately equip them to succeed in both of those missions. The Guard plays a critical role in supporting emergency disaster relief, and I applaud their purchase of 500 Humvee ambulances for use in every state. But these ambulances are severely lacking. They contain only the minimal and most basic medical equipment sets. Alarmingly, they lack modern life-saving equipment like cardiac defibrillators and vital signs monitors. The Guard's ambulances must be properly equipped to deal with emergencies. This is especially important in a state like Oregon, which faces the threat of wildfires and the prospect of a massive earthquake and resulting tidal wave. As the ambulances are outfitted now, personnel will be extremely limited in the available treatment they can provide to the injured people they seek to protect. State Guard associations and the National Guard Association agree. They have ranked the procurement of medical equipment sets as a priority for the last 2 years. Clearly there is a need, and we need to meet it. Now, Chairman Young and Ranking Member Veslowski, it's my understanding that you are opposed to the amendment as drafted, but support the underlying policy. And Chairman Young, I appreciate your support of an assessment on this issue on the floor last year. I ask if both of you will be willing to work with me to address this issue as the appropriations process moves forward, and if so, I would withdraw my amendment. And I yield time if the Chair and Ranking Member could please respond.
If the gentlewoman would yield, I would, first of all, not make any representations as to what will happen ultimately in conference. That is unpredictable. But I do compliment the woman for pointing out the valuable role that the Guard serves both as far as our military as well as disaster relief. And the fact is that additional resources are needed as far as saving lives and ensuring people's safety. And in particular, again, a dual use, if you would, a twofer. The fact is, despite the large amount of money set aside in this bill, there are fiscal constraints, and some of that pressure is evidenced by the lack of funding for the program that you so ardently am addressing. So again, I would think, speaking for myself, I certainly hear your voice.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and I yield to the chairman.
Would the gentlelady yield?
Yes, I yield to the chairman.
Gentleman, floor.
I want to thank her for being willing to work with the subcommittee on this issue for quite some time. And we understand her interest, and we agree with that interest. And we look forward to continue to work with her as we proceed with this bill through the Congress and back to the House floor, hopefully one day. And we just want to guarantee her that we will continue to work, and we thank her for her cooperation.
Reclaiming my time, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for your leadership on this bill and also for your efforts to support the Guard. I ask unanimous consent that my amendment would be withdrawn in light of the comments made on the floor this afternoon.
The amendment's withdrawn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
It's now in order to consider amendment number 27, printed in House Report 113-170. What purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 27, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Wahlberg of Michigan.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to offer a bipartisan amendment with Mr. Cohen of Tennessee, Ms. Esty of Connecticut, and Mr. Ridgel of Virginia that will go a long ways to ensure American tax dollars in Afghanistan are spent in a wise and realistic fashion. My amendments would specifically reduce funding of the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund by $79 million to a total of $200 million, the level adopted by this House during last year's defense appropriations bill. The savings would then be sent to the spending reduction account. We've already spent billions of dollars toward rebuilding the infrastructure of Afghanistan, and Congress has appropriated over $1 billion alone to the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund since it was created in 2011. As of March 31st of this year, SIGAR, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, reported that only $102.9 million of the $1 billion that Congress has appropriated has actually been dispersed for projects. Perhaps even more significant, SIGAR has found that the projects which are underway are behind schedule and years away from completion, and raised serious concerns about whether some of the projects may run counter to our goals and the COIN strategy, either because they've created expectation gaps among the Afghan people or that they lack local citizen support. This year, $279 million has been requested for 2 new infrastructure projects. Now, I know we all look to our commanders in the field for guidance on what they need to finish the job in Afghanistan. But with $400 million in unobligated funds, I ask, Mr. Chairman, why commit to 2 brand new projects that we will likely never complete? With that, I reserve my time.
Reserves his time. Who seeks? With what purpose the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Chairman, rise to claim the time in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
I appreciate it. I have used the infrastructure fund in Afghanistan on any number of occasions in my district, in the committee, and on this floor as an example of the failure of our country to invest in the infrastructure of the United States of America, and have indicated that we are spending money to invest in the infrastructure of Afghanistan and failing in the United States. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that in the coming years we have about $3.6 trillion of economic infrastructure investment we need to make, and the shortfall as far as funding is about 1.6. But I would note that the gentleman's amendment does not rectify that domestic problem we face, because the cut he proposes, that I do oppose, redirects those funds to the spending reduction account. And the fact is, as far as a legacy and giving the people of Afghanistan a chance in the future, I do believe we have to continue with this program. It was requested by the Secretaries of Defense and State in November of 2010 for the fiscal year 2011 Appropriations Act. At that time, Secretary of Defense Gay, Secretary of State Clinton said, it is needed to support critically important infrastructure projects, such as an initiative underway to bring electricity, simple electricity, to Kandahar City, which directly supports counterinsurgency strategy, and would point out to the House that in 1989, the international community, and I think we would have to include our country in that, abandoned Afghanistan to years of civil war. As a result, this region of the world gave us the Taliban and al-Qaeda in the wake of the withdrawal after Soviet incursions in the 1980s. I do not think we should make that mistake again, and we should make an investment. As I mentioned in an earlier debate, as the U.S. draws down forces for the post-2014 security environment, we should prepare to leave Afghanistan on positive terms. As we depart, the U.S. should help to repair a nation torn by years of war with the means to develop itself to move beyond the past conflict. And if the gentleman from New Jersey would seek recognition, I would be happy to recognize him at this time.
Thank the ranking member for yielding to me. And I rise to oppose the gentleman's amendment. According to the President's own budget request, and I quote, "The Afghan Infrastructure Fund has been an invaluable resource in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Initiated in fiscal year 2011, the AFI funds infrastructure projects in Afghanistan that are a key feature of the counterinsurgency strategy and the civilian military strategic framework endorsed by the Commander U.S. Forces Afghanistan to lock in security gains and to maintain stability by providing basic, essential infrastructure to the people of Afghanistan." End of quotation marks. Mr. Chairman, in other words, the projects that would be eliminated or reduced are vital to protecting our currently deployed troops and civilian employees besides the Afghanis themselves, and that's a worthy investment. Still got 68,000 troops over there, a lot of civilians supporting the effort, contractors even, and a lot of international forces. They deserve this protection. This is a good long-term investment. I thank the gentleman for yielding to me.
And I would reserve to balance my time.
The gentleman from Indiana reserves his time. The gentleman from Michigan.
I request the chairman how much time I have remaining.
2.5 minutes.
The gentleman has 2.5 minutes remaining. And the gentleman from Indiana has 1 minute remaining and the right to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to yield at this time a minute to my good friend from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the time, and this is truly bipartisan, in that we're bipartisan in favor and they're bipartisan against. And we all, Mr. Speaker, have the best intentions. But I would submit to the people that speak in favor of the spending of this fund, in theory, it's wonderful and it's great. But the same people who endorsed this built a $43 million base that will never be used and will be torn down. The fact is, much of this money cannot be maintained. We're giving monies to the Afghanis for programs that they cannot maintain. They can't maintain the roads. They can't maintain the equipment. They can't maintain the equipment that we give them. And so it's wasted. And it's gone on and on and on. And much of it has been stolen over the years. There's a lot of theft and a lot of corruption. The gentleman's amendment, which I joined with him on in a bipartisan fashion, cuts $79 million. Mr. Cicilline's got an amendment that cuts everything. I've got a compromise that cuts about half of it. Some of it needs to be cut, if not all of it, but at least half. we are throwing away monies that we know from the past are wasted and not doing the job that they're intended to do. Good intentions are the road. Hell is paved with good intentions. I yield the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Gentlemen, as a review, my amendment would reduce the funding of the Afghanistan Infrastructure Fund by $79 million to a total of $200 million, the level adopted by this House during last year's defense appropriations bill. SIGAR has found that the projects which are underway right now are behind schedule and years away from completion and raise serious concerns about whether some of the projects may run counter to our goals and the COIN strategy. Finally, Mr. Chairman, additionally, there is, as the end to operations in Afghanistan draws near, the Afghan people will need to bear the responsibility of building and maintaining their own infrastructure, to say the least. The Afghan government has often not been a reliable partner in these projects. They've often had little role in designating these projects, designing them, carrying them out, power lines, roads, and building projects that ultimately will not be used. The Department's own budget justification states that because not all fiscal year 2012 and 2013 projects have been awarded, the fiscal year 2014 budget estimate is based on limited actual cost data. At a time often difficult choices need to be made, we have a concern that as Congress is being asked to support funding and projects that they really have limited cost data involved with. I ask for support for this amendment. I believe that the dollars can be used indeed to grow an economy for ourselves and ultimately deal with infrastructure projects here in our own country, and I yield back my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. He's got one. He got a. Gentleman yields back his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in House Report 113-170, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 3 by Ms. Gabbard, Amendment number 10 by Mr. Blumenauer, Amendment number 14 by Mr. Polis, Amendment number 15 by Mr. Blumenauer, Amendment number 17 by Mr. Nugent, Amendment number 20 by Mr. Nadler, Amendment number 23 by Mr. Moran of Virginia, and Amendment number 25 by Mr. Pohl of Texas. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first series of votes. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Gabbard, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Ms. Gabbard of Hawaii.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
This is the first series of amendment votes on the defense spending bill. 100 amendments are allowed. The legislation is being considered under what's called a structured rule, meaning the House Rules Committee has approved all of the amendments that are being considered. The Hill writes that members are usually allowed to propose an unlimited number of amendments to spending bills, but House GOP leaders did not want the bill to get bogged down with controversial proposals that would slow down the bill. As a result, Republicans have allotted a total of 4 amendments on the NSA, Syria, and Egypt. Those amendments are expected to come up toward the end of debate, which will continue into tomorrow and possibly Thursday. Here's more about the amendments in the bill.
And covering debate in the U.S. House on the 2014 defense spending bill, Jeremy Herb with the Hill. What are some of the controversial amendments coming up in the debate?
The biggest fight so far has been over amendments on the National Security Agency's surveillance program. Congressman Justin Amash, a Libertarian Republican, has put forward an amendment that would basically defund the NSA programs if they don't specifically limit information on those who aren't under investigation. His amendment would significantly curtail what the NSA's spying activities currently are, at least what we've learned, and it has been quite controversial. The House Republican leaders basically delayed this bill for a week as they were trying to figure out whether or not they wanted to give Congressman Amash a vote. They decided on Monday that they would allow his amendment to receive a vote.
What about amendments dealing with U.S. aid to Egypt and Syria?
Yeah, those are the other two controversial packages, and I think those are kind of all being left for the end of this bill. There were, I believe, 9 amendments offered that would restrict either military aid or military action in Syria without specific congressional approval. The House is going to vote on one of those amendments later on during the bill. There's also an amendment that would limit aid to Egypt without specific congressional approval. And this is kind of, it's a pushback. The administration has said that it's going to arm the Syrian rebels, provide military aid. That was approved after some delay by the Congressional Intelligence Committees. And this brought it out and required the entire Congress to approve the aid rather than just the intelligence panels.
Does the inclusion of the debate on these amendments, Egypt and Syria and NSA, will that be enough to satisfy the sponsors? Will be enough to secure passage of the entire bill when that happens later this week?
It looks like it will. You know, there was talk from Congressman Amash and some of his Libertarian members that they were going to try, you know, to stop debate, to defeat the rule, and they dropped that after they got votes on their amendments. It's going to be interesting because this is really the first time that we're seeing Congress weigh in on the NSA spying programs since they were revealed in the Guardian stories 2 months ago.
On the NSA amendment in particular, where are Democrats?
That is the question. Steny Hoyer wouldn't say kind of his thoughts on it when he was asked about it on Tuesday. You have liberal Democrats who are joining with the Libertarian Republicans in opposition to this, but some of the more moderate Democrats, particularly, you know, members of the Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, you know, they're still weighing. There was a briefing today, there was a briefing on Tuesday that with General Alexander, the director of the NSA, so he could address their questions on the NSA's program.
The administration has issued a veto threat. What's their objection? And secondly, how does the spending level for this bill this year, 2014, compare with years past?
Yeah, this bill is it authorizes about $600 billion in defense spending, including the base Pentagon budget and also the overseas contingency operations for the war in Afghanistan. It's below last year's levels, but it is above the pre-sequester levels of spending that have been, you know, set in the Budget Control Act of 2011. The veto threat is over that in that the House Budget Committee has approved a budget that cuts discretionary spending down to sequester levels. It doesn't do it for defense, it does it for all the other agencies, and the administration objects to that approach. You know, I think the bill is going to pass, and it doesn't seem like the veto threat would be followed through on, but it's certainly going to be the fight over the appropriations bills going forward.
Where's the Senate bill, defense bill, stand right now?
The Senate Defense Appropriations Committee has not yet marked up their bill. They're expected to do that later this month, and then it's a question of when that goes to the floor, which is still to be determined.
Jeremy Herb writes for The Hill, covering defense debate, defense spending bill debate in the House, and you can follow his writing at thehill.com. Thanks for that update.
Thank you.
And as we heard a minute ago, the White House says the president will veto the Pentagon spending bill if it gets to his desk. Here's what the Marine Corps Times is writing about that veto threat. A veto of the $512.5 billion defense funding bill was threatened by the White House Budget Office, not so much because of complaints about the level of defense spending, but because the Obama administration doesn't want military spending to rob money from other federal programs. The story goes on to say the White House complains the House bill is too generous with military pay, not generous enough with pay for federal civilian workers, and doesn't include administration-proposed cost-cutting measures such as base closings and raising TRICARE health fees for military retirees. That in the Marine Corps Times. Members are voting now on an amendment offered by Representative Gabbard that would increase funding for the Navy's anti-ship missile program by $104 million. And as this vote continues, here's debate on the bill from earlier.
Madam Chairman, the subcommittee has produced this bill after months of bipartisan cooperation, months of hearings, and months of classified briefings. And we present a bill today that is $512 billion, $3.4 billion below the CBO estimate of the President's request, and approximately $28.1 billion above the estimated fiscal year 2013 sequestration level. For overseas contingency operations, OCO, the bill includes $85.8 billion, which is $1.5 billion below last year's level. We have worked closely with all parties. Mr. Visklosky has been involved in every step of the way on producing this legislation. Our committee staff is unequaled anywhere in this Congress, and they have done a tremendous job for the subcommittee. So just some highlights of the bill. There's $580 million to fully fund the authorized military pay raise, $36 million to fully fund the anticipated fuel costs, $950 million to fully fund the 2nd Virginia-class submarine, $922 million to restore facility sustainment, modernization, and restoration funding, and $692 million for military medical research, including $246 million for cancer research and $125 million for traumatic brain injury. During the next couple of days, we are going to consider 100 amendments. So everybody be prepared. There's going to be a long day and a long night. And so, Madam Chair, to get us started off on the right track, I'm going to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Chair, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I would like to begin by expressing my appreciation to Chairman Young and to congratulate him on the bipartisan and transparent manner in which he has crafted the fiscal year 2014 defense bill. I also want to express my gratitude to Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Lowy, and all of the members of the Defense Subcommittee for their efforts. We would not be here today but for their outstanding effort. Would also note that this will be the last defense appropriation bill we bring to the floor with the membership of Mr. Bonner from Alabama. With his leaving this institution, we are losing a very serious and thoughtful member who has worked assiduously every day to leave the world better, and certainly want to recognize his individual contribution. The bill also could not have been written without the dedication, hard work, and sound judgment of the staff that Mr. Young has already referenced. I do want to thank Tom McLemore, Sherry Young, Tim Prince, Jennifer Miller, Walter Hearn, Paul Terry, B.G. Wright, Brooke Boyer, Ann Reese, Andrea Ramsey, Megan Rosenbush, Maureen Holohan, Paul Jola, Rebecca Legere, Kent Clark, Michael Rigney, and Joe DeVoe. The bill at hand is fundamentally aimed at restoring readiness and training for the services, two areas that have suffered greatly in the budgetary upset of the current year. While Chairman Young has noted that the bill's $212 billion in funding is approximately $28 billion more than in fiscal year 2013 post-sequestration, it does contain a number of significant reductions. The bill cuts $617.8 million from the Joint Strike Fighter program to address unjustified cost growth and unjustified concurrency estimates for the program. It cuts another $112 million due to an overstatement of Army travel requirement. The bill rescinds $443 million for C-27J aircraft. The bill and report contain a significant amount of language and robust funding for initiatives to respond to sexual assault in the armed services. Sexual assault in any circumstance is unacceptable and maddening. The fact that it is prevalent within the military is even more so because of the standard to which our men and women in uniform hold themselves. These are individuals who are committed to give their last full measure of devotion to our nation, who in order to be effective need to unconditionally trust each other. Sexual assault undermines all of this. Though I strongly support the efforts contained in this bill, they are aimed mainly at offender accountability and caring for victims. Even though the comprehensive solution to this issue lies outside the services, it is imperative that the proper attitudes and training start during the recruitment process for the officers and enlisted and continue throughout each service member's career. I would also note that the bill includes $20 million above the request for suicide prevention and outreach consistent with the funding level of the past 2 years. Suicides are another disheartening problem within the services, especially given the emphasis that the Department and Congress have placed on the issue over the past few years. But money is not the only solution. We need to spend the appropriated dollars as wisely and effectively as possible. I was taken aback in a hearing earlier this year to learn that the Navy has a collection of 123 programs aimed at addressing suicide and resiliency. While I'm sure that each one of these programs is well-intentioned, the sheer number spreads resources too thin and creates confusion. To their credit, the Navy is in the process of implementing task force recommendations to dedicate more resources to the programs that truly work. Additionally, I would like to express my support for a solution that benefits all future users of the Integrated Electronic Health Record Program. I am proud of the efforts of our subcommittee and the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Subcommittee to effectuate this long-awaited improvement to medical care for our still serving military members and our veterans. Additionally, the cooperation between our subcommittees and with our corresponding authorization committees demonstrates the importance Congress places on the issue. I am pleased that the bill report contains provisions that enhance oversight at the Department. The Office of the Inspector General is funded at $347 million, which is nearly $35 million above the administration's request. This office plays a vital role in moving the Department towards audible financial statements, which are long overdue and which I attach a great importance to. Also, while the committee increased funding relative to the budget request for environmental cleanup at formerly used defense sites, this increase is accompanied by additional reporting requirements. In the same vein as my prior comments, the money in this program must be spent more effectively going forward to ensure that we complete cleanup projects, not just continue them. Regarding missile defense, the bill increases advanced procurement funding for additional ground-based interceptors. This funding is accompanied by a requirement to document the adequacy of the testing plan for the ground-based interceptors. In light of the program's recent test failure, I continue to be very concerned about the concurrency of this program. I believe it is essential to maintain rigorous standards to ensure that the weapons we pursue are fully developed before we begin fielding them, and once fielded, that these weapons effectively perform their missions. Further, we should review to determine the cause of the latest test failure and understand that if this program needs to be changed, we should reevaluate our position in conference. While I support the bill, there are a few provisions that I have concerns with. In particular, the 3 general provisions regarding detainees at Guantanamo Bay. I believe that the continued operation of Guantanamo Bay reduces our nation's credibility and weakens our national security by providing terrorist organizations with recruitment material. I do regret that this bill and other relevant appropriation bills continues to thwart any attempts to close Guantanamo by prohibiting viable alternatives. Further, I am concerned that the bill essentially prohibits a pay raise for civilian employees at the Department of Defense. We rely on the Department of Defense civilians working side by side with our military personnel to provide medical care for our troops, to perform vital logistics, maintenance and acquisition services, and to provide many other essential services within the department. Even a modest raise that maintains pay equity between civilian and military personnel sends a critical message of support to these employees. And looking ahead, I am concerned that if the shadows of the future remain unaltered, we will experience serious problems ensuring the continued defense of our nation. As Todd Harrison at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments has noted, rather than getting larger and more expensive over the past decade, the military has simply grown more expensive. This reality makes our future choices even more difficult, and it is imperative that Congress joins with the Department in working through these decisions at arm's length and also as a partner. The Department of Defense did recommend some very difficult reductions in the budget submitted to us earlier this year, as they have done in previous years. And we as legislators can no longer afford to reflexively reject those recommendations because they affect a specific company, a specific region of the country, or are simply not the most politic of choices to be made. Our military is at a familiar crossroad, one they have been at before as the end of combat operations near. The additions and subtractions to defense funding made today must be carried out with an eye to the future, with a sense of the strategic impact on America's future ability to muster a force capable of successfully defending and protecting our country. In closing, I again want to reiterate my appreciation to Chairman Young for his cooperation and assistance in addressing the interests we have expressed. He and his staff have ensured that the subcommittee continues its long tradition of operating collaboratively and effectively and transparently. I am pleased that we are finally considering this bill on the floor and look forward to the debate. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Indiana reserves his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Madam Chairman, first I would like to thank Mr. Visclosky for his much more detailed description of this legislation. And I would now yield to the chairman of the full committee on appropriations, who has strongly committed to making sure that we pass all of our appropriations bills, Mr. Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Gentleman from Tennessee recognized for 5 minutes. Kentucky for 5 minutes.
Big difference. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding this time. And of course, I rise in support of this, the DOD appropriations bill. The bill provides more than $512 billion in base funding for our national security and military efforts, and $85.8 billion in overseas contingency operations war funding. This is a base funding decrease of $5.1 billion below fiscal 13, but is about $28.1 billion above the current level caused by automatic sequestration spending cuts. This total reflects an appropriate, thorough analysis of what is needed to keep this country safe. Freedom isn't free. Our liberties, our rights, our property are preserved by our national defense, but at a cost. Sufficient funding for the Pentagon and our military is of the utmost importance to the continued prosperity of the United States of America. It is and should be our top priority. We've already seen the distressing toll that the heavy-handed, indiscriminate cuts of sequestration have taken on our military, from grounded planes to reduced training time to postponed maintenance, all of which contribute to the loss of readiness of our troops. And as we saw all this month, as Department of Defense civilian furloughs began, our economy is also taking a significant hit. The funding level in this bill strikes a balance between fiscal responsibility and sufficient support for our military. Within this total, we prioritize funding to advance our missions abroad, to prepare and equip our troops and to ensure the readiness and effectiveness of our military. This includes adequate funding to purchase the equipment, weapons, and vehicles needed to keep our military protected at the ready and able to conduct successful operations. The bill also provides funding for ongoing operations and maintenance of military facilities, equipment, and bases fundamental to the successful missions of our armed forces. And essential funding is provided to develop new defense technologies, to advance the success of current military operations, and to plan for whatever new threats may arise in the future. A well-equipped military is not as effective without strong and well-prepared troops. This funding supports readiness programs that prepare our troops for both combat and peacetime missions, giving them flight time and battle training. In addition, the bill funds the authorized 1.8% pay raise for the military, above the 1% the President requested. To keep our troops healthy before and after battle, the Defense Health Program receives an increase above last year's level, funding medical facility upgrades, traumatic brain injury, and psychological health research, and suicide prevention outreach. The bill also addresses what has been a black mark on our military, Madam Chairman, the problem with sexual assault. The legislation fully funds sexual assault prevention and response programs and adds $25 million in funding for sexual assault victim assistance to preserve trust in our military and ensure that members of our armed forces are not sacrificing more than they already have to serve the nation. But a balanced budget, one that does not put us into massive debt to other governments or threaten our economic stability, is also paramount to our national security. Even these critical national security programs cannot spend precious tax dollars unchecked. The bill has implemented common sense reductions wherever possible, including rescinding unused prior year funding, nixing a proposed civilian pay raise, and saving $1 billion in anticipated excess funding. We've also prohibited funding to modify facilities in the U.S. to house Guantanamo detainees or to allow their transfer into the U.S. or its territories. When all is said and done, this bill cuts more than $5 billion below last year's enacted level, but I must emphasize that these reductions will in no way harm or negatively affect our national defense or the troops that fight to protect this great country. Madam Chairman, some will complain that the bill breaks the cap placed on defense spending under the sequester level for fiscal year 2014, put into place by the Budget Control Act. To this I say, of course it does. Mr. Chairman, I ask for an additional minute.
Yes, sure. How much?
Gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
The gentleman, additional 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional 2 minutes.
Of course it does. This massive, irresponsible, dangerous reduction to defense spending under the sequestration cap is completely beyond the pale. For example, if nothing is done to cancel the next round of sequestration cuts that are scheduled to take effect when the Congress adjourns, this bill would be cut to a total of $468 billion. So, before I close, Madam Chairman, I'd like to take this time to thank the venerable chairman of this committee, of this subcommittee, Bill Young. He's a national asset, and he has shown again the skill that he has in putting together a great bill. And to Mr. Visklosky, thank you for being a great partner to our chairman throughout this process. And to the staff and the entire subcommittee members, without your hard work, we would not have this bill on the floor. I salute you and endorse this bill wholeheartedly. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Indiana.
I would yield such time as she may consume to the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Lowy.
Gentlelady from New York, recognized for as much time as she may consume.
Mr. Speaker, I thank Chairman Young, Ranking Member Visklosky, Chairman Rogers for working across the aisle on the bill before us today, in keeping with the Defense Subcommittee's long bipartisan tradition. I also want to recognize and thank the Defense Subcommittee staff for working tirelessly on the nuts and bolts of this bill. Sadly, however, the appropriations process has become a quandary that could easily have been avoided with good old-fashioned compromise. Instead, we have disparate House and Senate allocations. House bills follow the Ryan budget, which endorses sequestration, is unrealistic, unworkable, and economically misguided, while the Senate and White House budgets are based on the higher level agreed upon in the Budget Control Act. With only 18 days of session left in the House before the end of the fiscal year, we are racing toward a government shutdown that is irresponsible. Assuming the sequester is turned off, this is a good bill. It includes additional funding and tougher penalties to address the epidemic of sexual assault plaguing our military, an increase for active duty pay by 1.8%, enhancements to embassy security by increasing the presence of Marine Corps security guards, substantial investments in health services and suicide prevention, maintenance of all the National Guard weapons of mass destruction, civil support teams, and continued support for the Israeli Cooperative Program. However, the bill also contains serious shortcomings. On July 8th, I was at Camp Smith in my district in New York, where 48 of the more than 600,000 defense civilian employees nationwide are being furloughed. Each will lose $2,706, 20% reduction to their fourth quarter earnings, on top of 3 years without a pay increase. Yet this bill does nothing to fix the pay freeze or furloughs resulting from the sequester. In fact, the majority simply ignores sequestration when it suits their purpose, including in the spending allocations for MILCON VA, Homeland Security, and defense bills, while the Republicans are steadfast in sticking to the post-sequester overall discretionary allocation they included in the Ryan budget. They are comfortable breaking the Budget Control Act's cap on defense spending by $47.7 billion. Of course, they may not tell you that unless we end the sequester on January 15th, those funds will be lost, creating a gaping hole in the defense budget. And they don't have the courage of their convictions to admit that breaking the defense cap further shortchanges vital
The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report Number 113-170, offered by Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
The House voting now on an amendment that would restore funding to fiscal year 2013 levels for environmental cleanup on former military sites. Congressional Quarterly writes that the National Security Agency held 4 hours worth of top-secret briefings today to lobby members of the House to continue funding its secret surveillance program. First reported by the Huffington Post, the head of the NSA, General Keith Alexander, urged House lawmakers during the classified briefings to oppose an amendment to the defense bill from Representative Justin Amash of Michigan that would defund the NSA's blanket collection of telephone records. Republicans held a 2-hour briefing with Alexander at 11 a.m. Democrats followed at 1 p.m. And the article says that a senior aide for Amash told CQ Roll Call that despite the unusual lobbying effort, the lawmaker had not changed his stance. There are 7 more amendment votes expected after this one.
On this vote, the yeas are 176, the nays are 242, and the amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 14, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, on which further proceedings were postponed and in which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Polis of Colorado.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
This amendment is offered by Representative Polis of Colorado. It would cut $107 million from ground-based missile defense systems. Amendment debate will continue after this series of votes, and more votes are expected later tonight. The Chamber is expected to continue work on the defense spending bill tomorrow. We'll also have live coverage on C-SPAN 3 tomorrow. Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox will testify before a Senate subcommittee in the morning, live at 10 Eastern. President Obama will speak live in Galesburg, Illinois at Knox College just before 1 p.m. Eastern. He's beginning a 2-month series of speeches focusing on the economy and jobs. And we'll also cover a panel from the Congressional Caucus on Black Men and Boys on the status of black males, and that will include panelists Kwesi Mfume and Michael Eric Dyson. That'll be live at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, also live on C-SPAN 3.
not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 15, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, in which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in House Report number 113.